Hey everyone, welcome back to English Lessons with Guneet. In today's video, I'm going to do the story The Elevator by William Sleator. So, it may seem a spooky story by reading as we get to the main climax of the story. And the main purpose of writing this story is to show you that you should face your fears instead of running away from them. Running away from your fears will simply end up in a meeting the fate as Martin has to face because of his real or imaginary fears. Martin is the protagonist in the stories. He is a 12-year-old boy who is afraid of elevators. So, let's see how this interesting story is. It was an old building with an old elevator, a very small elevator which could carry only 3 people. Now, from the first line only, we can get to know how tiny and how small the elevator would be because it could only carry 3 people at a time. Now, Martin, who was a thin 12-year-old, felt nervous in it from the first day. He and his father had moved into the apartment. Of course, he was always uncomfortable in elevators, afraid that they would fall, but this one was especially unpleasant. So, if we talk about the first line, this 12-year-old and thin, this is his appearance, we can say, and it is important for MCQ basis. And then this is just basically the appearance of him, and it also shows how he was afraid from the elevator in that apartment from the first day onwards only. Forever he and the next line tells that forever and ever he had a fear of elevators. He was always uncomfortable in the elevators, and what was his main fear? His main fear was that they would fall. But this one that was there in the building that he and his father had moved in, it was like, it was especially unpleasant. Then perhaps this was because of the poor lighting and the dirty walls. Now, further few reasons are there which are very important. You should know 4 of these. 4 reasons are there of why he disliked the elevator that was there in the apartment. First is, perhaps this was because of the poor lighting and the dirty walls. Means the lighting of the elevator was very bad, it was very poor, and the walls were very dirty. So that's why it gave a very unpleasant feeling. And the poor lighting and the dirty walls, they're mostly shown in the horror movies. So that's why it was a bit scary also for him, we can say. Then perhaps it was because of the door which never stayed open long enough and slammed shut with a loud clanging noise. Now, this is the second reason that why I didn't like the elevator, because of the door that was there. The door, it never stayed open like long enough, like very quickly in the snap of a finger it used to shut up, and it slammed when it got closed. It closed with a loud clanging noise. It was very eerie sound. Perhaps it was the way the elevator shuddered each time it left the floor as if it was exhausted. Now, this is the third reason, because it can be because the elevator, it was not properly maintained, or it also might be old. So that's why as it went from one floor to another, then to the another, it just shuddered each time. It felt like it was exhausted. It can collapse any moment. Then the fourth is that maybe it was simply too small. And now, how can we say that it was too small? It was because it seemed crowded with even 2 people only in it. So it was very small. So, Martin also would have been feeling claustrophobic at the same time because of the small size of the elevator, which even seemed crowded with only 2 people in it. The stairs were no better. Now, he basically lived on the 17th floor. You'll get to know this further in the story. Now, one way to go to his house was the elevator, and the second way were the stairs. Now, both of them were absolutely worse. They were worse than the other. So that is the thing, neither of them was good. Now, we have stated why the elevator was not good. Now, we're going to discuss about why the stairs were even no better. Now, the stairs were no better. Martin tried them one day after school. The stairs were no better. Martin tried them one day after school, means he was afraid of the elevator, so he just thought about why not try the stairs for once. So he tried the stairs one day after school. There were no windows and the lights were not working. Now, these were the 2 problems that were there with the stairs also, that there were no windows, means it was completely dark, and the lights were also not there. So the dark stairs would be very spooky and scary. For a 12-year-old, it would be too much scary. Then Martin's footsteps echoed behind him on the cement as though there was another person climbing, getting closer. So now see the next line that is there. It is even more scarier that whenever he climbed the stairs, his footsteps, they echoed him, and it felt like somebody else was following him and getting closer to him. By the time he reached his home on the 17th floor. Now here they have also told about at which floor he lived. I had already told you before, he lived on the 17th floor, means he had to use the stairs or the elevator, one of them. There was no like another way for him to go. He had to choose one of them. He was gasping for breath, means he was very scared of the elevator, so he just tried to take the stairs one day after school, and by the time he reached his home on the 17th floor, he was gasping for breath. And Martin's father, if we talk about him, he was like he's not given any name in the story, but he has no friendly relations with his son. He's shown as like a criticizing Martin's infirmities in the story that is there. Though like an ideal parent, he wants his son to be mentally and physically strong, yet it appears his words of advice like they don't have an effect on Martin, a 12-year old boy, because he's too harsh, I would say, in his words. Further in the story, if you really get to know why I'm saying these things, Martin's father, he worked at home, means he worked from home. He wanted to know why Martin was out of breath. Why didn't you take the elevator? He asked, frowning at Martin. Means we can say he was a bit kind of angry that why didn't you take the elevator? If you had that choice and you're coming from the stairs, he just already, his father guessed that he's out of breath, means he came from the stairs only, that is why he's out of breath. Now that's why he just asked him the direct question, why didn't you take the elevator? Now he asked, frowning at Martin. Now these are the negative comments that he spoke to him. You're not only skinny and weak and bad at sports. His face seemed to say, but you're also a coward. Now why is he saying a coward? That you're so afraid to go in the elevator, because he's the father, so he's obviously aware about the fear of Martin. So he's like giving him more and more negative comments that are there. So what did he say? You're not only skinny, weak, you're also bad at sports, but you're also a big coward. Now imagine how these words would have struck Martin. He's just a 12-year-old boy, and how bad he would have felt at this. That he's already having a fear of something in his day-to-day life, and at this time he might be needing the support of somebody. And if his father is only saying such mean things to him, then what would be the condition of the poor boy at that time? After that, Martin always took the elevator, because he could not, like I can say, it's not easy for any child to be able to pay such mean comments of the parents. That's why after that day, he always took the elevator. He would get used to it. He told himself, like he said, yeah, if I, it's a bit difficult for me, but if I do it daily, I would get used to it. It would become a habit for me. Just like he got used to being bullied at school. This is another sad thing we can say, because at the home also his father is like that. He's not behaving well with him. He's not helping him get out of the fear of elevator, but rather he's even demotivating him more and more, and he's having the fear of elevator, which he has to use in his day-to-day life, and also at school he's getting bullied at the same time. So Martin is having a quite difficult life at just the age of 12 years, but he didn't get used to it. He didn't get the habit of it, what he had thought he would, but he didn't. Then he was always afraid that it would stop suddenly and he would be trapped inside it for hours. Means still he always had the fear in his mind of getting trapped in the elevator, but it wasn't much better when there were other passengers. Means maybe some of you might be thinking that if other passengers would be there, at least he would have such a thought in his mind that yeah, others would help me, but he was not even comfortable with the other passengers in the elevator. Now why this was, let us read further. He didn't like to be close to them. Means in the elevator, when there's a lot of rush, we have to stick to each other at that time, but in the elevator, as we already this specific elevator, if it even seemed crowded with two people, so you can even imagine the scene, how it would be, how they would have to stand so close to each other. So Martin wasn't comfortable with this thing. So this was the first thing. Then he also disliked the way people tried hard to not look at each other, staring at nothing. So the second thing that Martin didn't like about traveling with other people in the elevator was that how the people, they tried so hard that they don't have to stare at each other during the time they are there in the elevator, but there is no other way that they cannot do it, because they have to stare at each other even though they don't want to do it intentionally, but they have no other choice except that. So he's even an introvert who has we can say social anxiety kind of. One morning the elevator stopped at the 14th floor. Now, let me tell you beforehand only that the next lines that are going to be there, a new character is going to enter the story, and this is a big twist in the story, I would say, because of the entry of the new character. Let's read forward to see who is the new character, what is the twist. One morning, the elevator stopped at the 14th floor. At which floor it stopped? 14th floor. This is what from MCQ. And a fat lady got in. Who got in? A fat lady. She was wearing, now this is the appearance, which is usually asked in the exam, that what was she wearing, what was the appearance of the person who entered in the elevator, who entered, a fat lady entered, and she was wearing an old green coat that ballooned around her. I mean, she was so much fat that the green coat that she was wearing, it seemed to be like ballooned around her. It was like spread all around her like that. Then, as she waddled into the elevator, she was fat, so with much, she was like coming into the elevator, seeing that she was waddling. She waddled into the elevator. Martin was sure he felt sink under her weight. Now, in the elevator, as we had started earlier, that only 3 people could come at a time, and even with 2 people, it seemed too much crowded. And when a single fat lady is coming into the elevator, it seemed like the elevator was, going down with the weight of her, because she was so much heavy. Then she was so big that her coat brushed against him, and he had to squeeze himself into one corner. Means she was only occupying the space of those 3 people. Even more than that, we can say, because how there was no space for anybody else, and poor Martin, he had to squeeze himself into a corner. Then there was no room for anybody else. The door closed quickly behind her, and instead of facing it, she turned around and stared at Martin. Now, first fear of Martin that was there was like to be surrounded by so many people. It was quite difficult for Martin to like stay in that situation. The first fear, it was already captured by the lady. She already had taken the space of so many people. Then this was the first thing that the lady has done. Now moreover, the staring fear that we have just studied about, now instead of staying towards the door, she rather turned towards Martin and stared at Martin. Now this was the second fear that was there of Martin staying with the people, and both of the fears the lady was fulfilling. So Martin might be feeling so much uncomfortable at that situation that he looked at her for a moment. She had large fleshy cheeks and no chin. I mean, she was so much fat that she had very large and fleshy cheeks, and her chin was not visible because of her cheeks and a huge mass of neck. Now it was again because she was too much healthy. Her blue eyes were tiny but sharp. Means her eyes, they were quite tiny but still they were sharp, and they were of which color? Blue color. This seemed to be boring into Martin's face. Means she was just staring continuously into Martin's face. Then Martin looked away, but the woman didn't turn around. I mean, he just did a little side thing that he just looked away, but the lady, she didn't turn. She was like continuously staring at him. Then was she still looking at him? He was just thinking. Then He glanced at her quickly, then looked away again. She was still watching him. Now, Martin, he was feeling quite uncomfortable, very uneasy with the lady, because the way she was staring at him, it made him feel even more, he was getting even more afraid. Then he wanted to close his eyes, he wanted to turn around and stare into the corner, but how could he do so? Now, what all he wanted to do? He wanted to close his eyes. He wanted to turn around and stare into the corner, but how could he? Now, why couldn't he do this? The elevator creaked down to two. Now, why couldn't he do this? He couldn't do this because the lady, she was so much fat that there was no space that he could even move. The elevator creaked down to 12, then 11. The piggy eyes was still looking at him. Means throughout the time they both were traveling, the lady was just staring at him continuously. Now at the 14th floor she had come. Now slowly they were going down, and the elevator, why did it creak down? Because the lady was so much heavy. That's why. And she had to be crazy because now why she had to be crazy? This is the answer. Why else would she stare at him like this? That's why. What was she going to do next? Now more and more questions were coming into his mind, that why is she behaving like this with me? He was getting more and more afraid. The lady was, getting scarier and scarier for him as the time was passing. She did nothing. He had a fear that the lady might be doing something wrong. She would do something wrong to him, but she did nothing. She was just staring at him. She only watched him, breathing loudly, until the elevator reached the first floor at last. Means at the last, the first floor, it finally, they came, and now Martin could finally go out of the elevator. Martin wanted to run past her and get out, but there was no room because she was so much fat. He could only wait as she turned and moved slowly into the lobby. Now, finally, the fear of Martin, the lady, she was gone from there. Then he ran. He didn't care what she thought. He ran nearly all the way to school because he was so much scared of the incident that had happened with him. He thought about her all day. Now, many questions were arising in his mind because he was so much traumatized by the incident that has taken place with him in the morning. Because sometimes the thing that happens with us in the morning, the whole day we cannot concentrate on any other work, but rather that one thing only comes in our mind again and again, and that is the case that was happening with Martin at that time. And what were the questions, let's see, that were arising in his mind? That did she live in the building? First question. He had never seen her before, and the building was not very big. Now he was like thinking he had never seen her before, and did she live in the building? That is why he was thinking that I have never seen her before. Then must she be a resident of the building only? But he thought, how is this possible? Because the building is not so big, and I have seen like almost most of the people, because the building is not too big. Then how is it possible that I have never seen this lady ever before? Maybe she was visiting somebody else. She might be a visitor. Then he thought. But then another question struck him, that at 7:30 in the morning was too early for visiting. Now, what was Martin doing 7:30 in the morning? He was going to school. But if she was a visitor at the same time, but 7:30 to visit somebody, it is too early to visit somebody. It's not so normal to visit somebody so early in the morning. Then after school, when he came back, he felt nervous because he still had the thought of the old lady only in his mind. And but why should he be afraid of an old lady? He thought. He felt ashamed of himself for being such a coward, that he's just being afraid of an old lady that is there, who was just staring at him and doing nothing else. She did not harm him in any way. He pressed the button and stepped into the elevator, hoping that it would not stop, but it stopped on the 3rd floor. Now he was hoping that nobody else comes in the elevator, because he was traumatized from the incident in the morning only, and he could not tolerate anybody else in the elevator now. But his fear, it again came into action, as on the 3rd floor it stopped. The elevator stopped. Now again, when the door it slid open, it revealing a green coat. And the green coat, who do you think it would be? Obviously, it is the old lady only, because she was only wearing the green coat in the morning, a piggish face and blue eyes, which were already staring at him as if she knew he would be there. Now, he was already not over with the thoughts of the morning, and again, the same person is in front of him. You can imagine how scared he would be at that moment. It wasn't possible. It was like a nightmare for him. What was like a nightmare for him? Seeing the old lady again, because of whom he was traumatized in the morning. But there was she, going up, said Martin, his voice little more than a squeak. Like, he was very nervous, he was very scared. So like a squeak, he said, like, you are going up. And she nodded. She didn't say anything, but she just nodded and stepped on. The door slammed. He watched her pudgy hand move towards the buttons, she pressed not 14 but 18th, the top floor. The elevator trembled and began to go up, because whenever weight is there and the weight has to come down, it's easy for the thing to come down, because weight, it usually moves down only with the force of gravity. But if more amount of weight we have to take up in the air against the force of gravity, then it's more difficult to take it. So same was the case here, that the elevator, it was already like not well maintained, and such a heavy person was going up, so it was in a very bad condition. So that is why it was, the elevator was trembling as it began to go up. The fat lady watched him like she was watching him in the morning. Now in the morning, you remember, she had met Martin on the 14th floor, and she had stopped on the first floor only, and now she had come from the third floor and she had to go on the 18th floor. Like, what is she even doing with so many floors? And she is like, not, she doesn't seem to be a visitor or a resident of the building. So this is even a more scarier thing about the lady. Now the lines about that which I have told you, these are the only things which we are going to discuss in the next paragraphs that are there. That this these are the thoughts that are coming in Martin's mind, that this morning she got on the 14th floor, and so why did she get on the third floor today and go up to the 18th? The elevator seemed to be moving more slowly than usual. Martin wanted to press him. Why did he wanted to press him? So that he could just walk out and walk up the he could just get out and walk up the stairs, but he couldn't reach the buttons without touching her, and he didn't want to do that. He was very uncomfortable in touching her in any way to reach the buttons. He just wanted to go out from there. Even when his house was on the 14th floor, he just thought that I'll use the stairs, but just let me get out of here. But there was no way in which he could press the buttons without touching the lady. When the elevator stopped on his floor, that was the 14th floor, she hardly moved out of his way. He had to squeeze past her, rubbing against her horrible scratchy coat. Now, when he reached his home on the 14th floor, he had to get out, but the lady, she didn't even move so that the other person could go out. So he had to just squeeze past her, and he rubbed against her horrible scratchy coat. Now he was afraid the door would close before he could get out. Now this was the fear that he always had, but now, the way he was squeezing out, he had a fear that the door would close, and he would have to stay again in the elevator only. She turned and watched him as the door slammed shut. Now she knows I live on 17. He thought, another fear unlocked for him, that now she knows that I live on the 17th floor. He thought, have you ever noticed a strange lady in the elevator? He asked his father that evening. Can't say I have, he replied, not looking away from the television, because his father, he didn't care whatever Martin said, and he wasn't interested in his life at all. So when Martin, he wanted to share about, because he's just a boy of 12, he needs some guidance, he needs someone with whom he can share his feelings, but he did not have anyone. So he just, casually he asked his father that, have you seen a strange lady in the elevator? Now his father said, can't say I have. So Martin knew he was probably making a mistake, because he knew how his father already had an image of him being a coward. He knew that he was making a mistake of telling his father, sharing with him his fear of the old lady, but he had to tell somebody about the woman. So he did not have anybody else without his father, so he said, let me tell my father only. She was in the elevator with me twice today. She just kept staring at me. She never stopped looking at me for a minute. Now, what all had happened with him mainly in the day, he just told his father. What are you so worried about now? His father said, turning impatiently away from the television. Now his father, he was not paying attention to him, but the moment he got to know that something is related to the elevator and the fear of it, Martin, that is there, so he just quickly turned from the impatiently from the television, and he was ready to scold Martin again and say his mean words. That, what are you so worried about now? Now what am I going to do with you, Martin? Honestly, now you're afraid of some poor old lady. Now Martin knew that this would happen, but he had to share with somebody, so he said what he felt. He shared his feelings with his father. I'm not afraid, he said. You are afraid, said the father. When are you going to grow up and act like a man? Are you going to be timid all your life? Now Again, his mean words had started, but Martin had to listen to all these. Martin didn't want to cry in front of his father because he was so much hurt from the words that he spoke. So he didn't want to cry in his front of his father and even become worse in front of him. So he just waited until he got into his room. His father probably knew he was crying. He didn't care about Martin at all. That's why even he was crying, he didn't care to console him. He slept very little in the morning. He slept very little. This he is Martin. In the morning, when the elevator door opened, the fat lady was waiting for him. Martin stood there, unable to move, then backed away. As she saw him, her expression changed. She smiled at the door slammed. Means the next morning when he got into the elevator, he saw that the old lady, she was the fat lady, she was already waiting for him. Like it seemed like she was just waiting for him only. And when she saw him, they had an eye contact and all. Her expression just changed and she gave him a very eerie, a very spooky smile. And she smiled as the door of the elevator slammed. Martin, hadn't entered the elevator, so he just, because of seeing the expression, he was so much scared that he just started running down the stairs. The stairs were dark, as we had already studied that there were no windows and poor lighting was there. So he fell. His father was silent on the way to the hospital. He was very disappointed and angry with him for being a coward and a fool at the same time, because he was coward and he didn't enter the elevator, and with his fear he was even a fool for the father, as he had injured himself only going down the stairs. Martin had broken his leg, means because of his fear he had physically also injured him and needed to walk on crutches. He could not use the stairs anymore, means the only option that was left for him was the elevator only. Was that why the fat lady smiles? Because she knew something like this would happen? Did she know what would happen? And the smile, the reason of her smile was the injury of Martin, that he would get injured in such a way. At least his father was there with him in the elevator on the way back from the hospital, so he had somebody. There was no room for the fat lady to get in, because the two people, they were more than enough to get the elevator crowded. And if she did, his father would see her and maybe he would understand that what Martin is feeling. So Martin was at least relaxed that thank God, now at least my father would be there with me in the elevator, and the fat lady, she cannot scare me right now. And even if she comes, his father would, probably understand what problem he is going through. When he got home, he could stay in the apartment for a few days, so he would not have to use the elevator or go to school. So his fear would, he would, at least he could avoid his fear for some days. Then the doctor said that he had to rest as much as possible so that he can recover. Then Martin felt quite safe from the fat lady now. Oh, I almost forgot. His father reached out and pressed number 9. So they were in the elevator. So his father said, oh, I just forgot. So what are you doing? Martin was scared, that trying not to sound afraid, because he was so much scared that again I'll have to stay alone in the elevator if my father goes anywhere. Now, why did the father press number 9? Because he, let's see the reason. Because I promised to wish Mrs. Ullman. Now, said his father, looking at his watch as he stepped out of the elevator. Now, Martin, he could not stay alone in the elevator because he had the fear that the old lady would approach him. Now, he is just saying that, let me go with you. I want to visit her too. Martin pleaded, struggling to move on his crutches. But the door was already closing. Afraid to be in the elevator alone, said the father. Grow up, Martin. And the door slammed shut. Means his father, he did not have any problem in leaving him alone, even after the incident that had happened. Then Martin hobbled to the buttons and pressed 9, but it didn't do any good because the door had already slammed right now. The elevator stopped at 10. It didn't stop at 9 again, but it rather stopped at 10. And what can we all imagine? Yes, you all imagined, right? That where the fat lady was waiting for him. She moved in quickly, and he was too slow to get past in her time to get out because he was in his crutches, and she was also fatted. She didn't leave any space for him to go out. The door closed and the elevator began to move. Hello, Martin, she said, and laughed and pushed the stop button. Now, finally, the old lady, she has spoken something. And what has she spoken? Hello, Martin, she said, and she laughed. So you can imagine the feeling, the situation that would have been for Martin at that time. His fear is standing in front of him, laughing and speaking in that spooky voice, and it would have been such a scary, such a horror film situation for him. And she even pushed the stop button. Now, all the fears of Martin are at one place only. The fear of staying in the crowded elevator. This is the first fear that is there. Then, the staring fear, that is also fulfilled by the old lady. Then, of getting stuck in the elevator, that is also fulfilled as she pressed the stop button. So, all of the fears the lady has fulfilled of Martin. So we all can make our own ending. That is how creatively we can think. So what do you think, that was the old lady really some old lady who was trying to, disturb Martin in some way? But the reality of the story is that the old lady, she was not at all actually a real person. She was just the fear and the imagination, the hallucination that Martin was having. She was not a real person at all. Now, it was just the fear of Martin. The lady is the fear who is personified as a person. The feels the presence of the fear inside the elevator. It is a psych. The fear is trying to overcome the boy. Nobody else saw the lady, like, even the father didn't see. And you know she always used to wear the same clothes, and all the fears that Martin had, they were all fulfilled by her. Now, anybody else had not ever met the lady, only Martin saw her always. Then, like, if we talk about the fears, like, no space was there. So this is what the Martin had, his first fear. And the lady was so much fat, so when she came, there was no other space. Then he had the fear of getting stuck in the elevator. That was also fulfilled by the lady as she pressed the stop button. The staring fear that is there, that the other people, they would stare at each other in the elevator, that was also fulfilled by the lady, as she always used to stare at Martin whenever they were there in the elevator. Now, he was timid, we can say, but he was not a coward. So at the last, we can conclude that only taking cudgels against it can resolve our predicament fears that are there. And we can see and imagine that how much a person can, how much a with can occur with a person just because of the fear that they have. He didn't have the courage to face his fear, and even if he could face his fear, he needed somebody who could console him, who could guide him. But if his father is only treating him in that way, so he was also not completely at the fault of being in that situation. And the main theme of the story is that we need to face our fears instead of running away from them. So I hope that you understood the story properly, and till next time, bye bye.